Welcome to the Daily Review. This is Razak, Senior Trading Strategist here at CM Trading, and today is March 3rd, 2025, and today is Monday morning. So looking at the highlights of the day, U.S. markets rumble right back and bringing most of the markets with them. But first, looking at today's major economic events, so we have at 3:30 South African time from the United States an ISM Manufacturing PMI number coming out. Now looking at the markets, we're starting out with the Forex symbols. We're watching the Canadian dollar and the Japanese yen both bounce versus US dollar. Now looking at the indices, the Dow Jones and the NASDAQ, yes, they bounce. Question is whether or not this is sustainable. And looking at commodities, it's gold and oil that bounce back. And looking at the stocks, it's the tech stocks that made a good comeback. And in general, the stocks in general made a good comeback, but Bank of America had a big gain yesterday. And lastly, for cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin catches the fever as well and bounces back. So let's take a look at the markets and see what we can expect from today's trading. So here we go. First with the Canadian dollar. Now, all markets that bounce that I'm talking about in the prelude to this, they all bounce for different reasons. Now, we're going to start with the Canadian dollar. Now, the Canadian dollar is having some sort of fever. Remember, U.S. is putting some tariffs on the Canadian dollar. So that increases the price of the Canadian dollar because it makes the Canadian dollar more expensive and Canadian products more expensive, rather. And because of that, less demand for Canadian stuff. So here we go. So this is showing it in real time. Now, for a market that's been really docile for about a decade, the Forex markets is right back in your face. Now, looking at the Japanese yen, also got a bounce off of that support. That was big. We called it. We did mention it, 149.11 to 150.38. That's a 100-plus pip move on the upside in just less than a week. An easy move right there. Now, jumping into commodities, gold did retrace quite significantly. Now, looking at a 4-hour chart, bouncing off of that 200-day moving average. Now, we're above 2860. We're about 100 points off of our all-time record highs. Still, relatively, a very small retracement, if you think about it, for where we've gone. So let's see if we get a bounce, or we're going to make a correction here and make it back to this 2787. Not a big deal because gold doesn't trade so great. Oil. What are we doing here? All right, so oil is still in a downwards momentum. You can see it. It's more consolidating in this area. Remember, we have support at 66, 77. It's not doing much, but it is a point of reference. Now, jumping into the American markets, the Dow Jones had a very decent week last week on Friday. Nice move to the upside. If it sustains itself, okay, above this 43,900-ish level, I would say we would continue going up higher. But just be aware we may get a dead cat bounce, which means that we'll challenge our support again on that 43,100-ish level. Now looking at the NASDAQ, 20,933 did retrace, did sell off quite aggressively, right? That's all the tech stocks that sold off. That's NVIDIA, that's Apple. AMD sold off quite aggressively. So we saw a tremendous sell-off last week, and yet we got a bounce. Now, this bounce might be a fake bounce, but let's see, okay? Because this is where, it really makes a difference. Now, looking at the stocks, Bank of America, let's take a look at that because that really gained very nicely. Look, it's orbital, right? Just straight through from $43 to $46. That's a big bounce for. And looking at JP Morgan, also had a decent bounce on the upside. Now, looking at the stocks, let's take a look at NVIDIA because that one was one of the stronger bounces. But again, we were at supportish levels, so no big deal that we retraced down to supportish level and then we bounce above it. So with that said, what else bounced last week? Let's take a look at Tesla because that one got beaten up horribly last week. I would use $300 as a resistance-ish level. 307 would be the second resistance-ish level if it continues going to that way. But we may see off another sell-off. Okay, so just be aware of it, that it's going to be a lot of pre-market action before we actually see what happens. And remember, we have FOMC coming up this month. That's a big interest rate decision. So we're going to see how this all unfolds. And so looking at the other tech stocks, all right, if we look at AMD, look at that. Didn't get a bounce. I mean, not even a little bit of a bounce. So this is a little bit troublesome, okay? Because making new lows for the year and not a bounce, even though it should have gotten a bounce. So keep this on the radar because if this breaks further, we can see further correction on the downside. Now let's take a look at Bitcoin. Bitcoin, of course, gets the bounce just like everybody else, but it did retrace below its 30-day moving average. This is super important on a daily. And the question is whether or not, again, is it going to continue this bounce and have a little bit of a rally, or is it going to consolidate and come back? Today, we're going to know that question, right? So just be aware of it. Keep this on the radar for today. This is Fed Razak. I want to wish you guys a great trading day. Thank you.